The night the South Cattle Barn erupted in towering flames was not a night meant for quiet endings, but for shattering reckonings. Inside the master bedroom on the second floor of the Reyes mansion, the heavy brass key still hung in the dark oak door where Caleb Reyes had left it as he sprinted wildly toward the roaring inferno in the lower yard. Eleanor Hargrove stood alone near the tall glass window in her fine white silk and lace nightgown, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, watching the inferno consume the dark Nebraska horizon. Down in the courtyard below, thick plumes of black smoke rolled across the frost-bitten grass, caught by the howling northern gale. Through the blinding glare and swirling golden embers, 13-year-old Clara Voss stood rigid in the shadow of the stone well, a soot-blackened iron hammer in her right hand. Before throwing the lit kerosene lamp into the dry winter hay, Clara had unlatched every single stall door and beaten the wooden corral rails with her iron hammer, driving the horses and cattle out into the open range. They galloped wildly past the towering flames, whinnying in terror, completely unharmed, but scattering into the freezing prairie night, safe from the inferno, yet creating total, unmanageable chaos for the Reyes ranch. Clara had not done this merely to strike a financial blow against the wealthy family that had treated her like an unwanted secret. She had done it out of revenge, yes, but above all, to create an explosive, unquenchable shockwave, a burning distraction that would force Caleb out of that room and buy Eleanor her freedom. Eleanor rushed down the dark oak staircase, her white silk gown catching the strange, flickering orange light streaming through the tall, leaded windows. She met Clara at the foot of the wraparound veranda. No words were spoken between them. In that chaotic second, none were needed. Eleanor simply took the orphan girl's small, soot-stained, calloused hand into her own, her warm hazel eyes shining with a deep, silent gratitude that went far beyond speech. Clara looked up, her dark braids whipped across her face by the howling gale, and whispered firmly, "The horses and cattle are safe, Eleanor. Don't worry. They're on the open range." Behind them on the porch steps, Doña Isabel Reyes stood in her dark navy nightgown, her silver-white hair unspooling in the gale, shouting helpless, panicked orders into the choking ash while ranch hands scrambled in blind terror with empty wooden buckets. Taking full advantage of the utter madness, Eleanor and Clara slipped past the burning timber, ran through the kitchen garden, and reached the unlatched gate at the edge of the property road, where a lone rider on a bay horse waited in the shadow of the ancient cottonwood trees. Thomas. He did not speak a word as they reached the edge of the road. With swift, practical efficiency, Thomas pulled his heavy wool trail coat from his saddle horn and wrapped it tightly around Eleanor's trembling shoulders, shielding her from the biting frost. He lifted Clara up onto the wagon bench behind them, pulled Eleanor firmly beside him, and snapped the leather reins. The heavy iron-rimmed wagon wheels carved deep ruts into the frozen gravel as the light wagon surged forward into the dark, vanishing into the vast Nebraska night before anyone in the burning courtyard even realized they were gone. Back at the grand mansion, the flames climbed the western timber beams, jumping from the cattle barn to the wooden roof of the main house. Caleb came sprinting back from the lower pens, his handsome face smeared with black soot, his dark golden hair messy. Remembering Eleanor locked in his second-floor room, he rushed up the carpeted stairs, shouting her name, his heart wild with a possessive, terrifying panic. He threw open the master bedroom door. The room was completely empty. The heavy burgundy drapes flapped wildly in the freezing draft, coming through the open door. Caleb ran down the long corridor, throwing open door after door: Marisol's room, Clara's east wing quarters, the formal morning room, all empty. The grand Reyes mansion was becoming a hollow shell of smoke and roaring crimson light. Doña Isabel came into the entrance hall below, her voice cutting through the crashing timber as she screamed for Caleb to get out before the roof collapsed. But Caleb had lost all rational control. The charming, polished mask he had worn for 34 years dissolved completely into a terrifying, unhinged rage. He swore violently, his blue eyes bloodshot, ignoring his mother's desperate pleas as he sprinted to the stables, threw a saddle onto his stallion, and galloped wildly out into the dark, searching every road, every creek bed, every shadow for the three of them. He found nothing. By sunrise, the howling northern gale died down, leaving the south cattle barn a smoldering mound of black ash and the east wing of the grand Reyes mansion severely charred. Thousands of dollars in timber, grain, and structure were lost in a single night. The next morning, Don Rufino walked the ruined yard alongside Sheriff Hollis, examining the charred foundations. It did not take an experienced lawman long to realize the fire was intentional. The broken iron latches on the horse stalls and the scent of kerosene near the dry hay storage made it undeniable. Yet both men marveled quietly at the fact that not a single horse or cow had perished. Every animal had been systematically freed before the match was struck. For 3 full days, Caleb and his armed men scoured the county, but Eleanor, Thomas, and Clara had vanished like mist over the flat prairie. On the night of the escape, the 3 travelers had ridden miles into the vast, uninhabited Nebraska rangeland, finding shelter inside the mouth of a shallow sandstone cave carved into a high bluff. They built a tiny hidden fire behind a rock ledge to keep the freezing wind at bay. They were exhausted, their faces streaked with dust and cold, but as they sat together on a worn wool blanket, a quiet, profound peace settled over them. For the first time in months, they were together, and they were free. It was by the warmth of that small fire that Eleanor finally turned to Thomas, her hazel eyes searching his face in the amber lamplight. "Thomas, back at the ranch, when Sheriff Hollis took you away in iron cuffs, how did you get free? How are you here?" Thomas leaned his head against the sandstone wall, a tired, faint smile touching his lips. "Sheriff Hollis is a man bound by 30 years of my mother's money, Eleanor," Thomas said softly, his voice rough from the trail smoke. "But his deputy, young Miller, is old man Kellerman's nephew. When Hollis locked me in the town cell and went across the street to drink at the saloon, Miller walked down the hallway with the brass key. He didn't say a word. He just opened the cell door, handed me my flat-brimmed hat, and said, 'Your father was a decent man to my family, Thomas. Ride fast.' I took the bay horse from behind the livery, and by the time Hollis realized I was gone, the sky behind the Reyes ranch was already turning red." Eleanor looked at him, tears welling in her warm hazel eyes as she reached out to hold his hand. Thomas held her fingers tightly, his clear green eyes full of an aching tenderness. Clara lay nearby, wrapped in Thomas's spare coat, listening to the crackle of the wood until her eyes drifted shut, sleeping peacefully for the first time in her young life, feeling safe between 2 people who had become her true family. "We can't stay in Nebraska," Eleanor whispered, leaning her head against Thomas's shoulder. "Caleb's men are watching the main roads." "The train stations in town will be watched," Thomas noted, his brow furrowing in the firelight. "Caleb knows the railway routes." "Then we don't use the town station," Eleanor said with quiet determination. "We ride south across the state line to the small water stop junction at Red Cloud. The westbound freight train stops there at dawn to take on water. At first light, they rode hard toward Red Cloud. The small water junction was quiet, surrounded by tall, frost-covered prairie grass. As the steam locomotive roared to a halt, its heavy iron wheels screeching against the rails, Thomas spotted 2 of Caleb's ranch hands standing near the platform, carbines slung over their coats, searching the passenger cars. Acting quickly, Thomas led Eleanor and Clara around the rear of the water tower, slipping through the clouds of white steam. They climbed into a dark, hay-filled boxcar just as the train gave a heavy lurch and began its long, chugging journey south toward Kansas. The train pulled into the dusty station at Valley Falls, Kansas. The air here smelled different of dry prairie grass, sunflowers, and the familiar grounding scent of Eleanor's childhood. They walked down the dirt road toward the edge of town, where Otis's small homestead stood beneath the tall cottonwood trees. As they entered the yard, a large, shaggy retriever came bounding off the porch, barking wildly before suddenly stopping, its tail thumping against the dirt as it recognized Eleanor's voice. "Buster!" Eleanor cried out, dropping her bag and sinking to her knees as the dog buried its wet nose into her neck. Otis stepped out onto the porch, his weathered face carving into a wide, disbelieving smile as he saw Eleanor standing in his yard, alive and unhurt, with Thomas and Clara beside her. "My lord, Nell," Otis muttered, his voice cracking with emotion as he rushed down the steps to embrace her. The next morning, with Buster running happily alongside them and Otis driving his old light wagon, Thomas, Eleanor, and Clara made the emotional journey back to the old Hargrove homestead. The air was crisp, the autumn sun casting long, golden shadows across the familiar Kansas fields. They walked together to the small, quiet family cemetery on the knoll overlooking the river. Otis, Thomas, Clara, and Buster stood back respectfully as Eleanor approached the wooden markers. First, she knelt by her mother's grave, placing a bundle of fresh yellow wild sunflowers against the weathered stone, her eyes filled with quiet love. Then, she moved to her father Edmund's grave. She stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her, her hazel eyes reflecting a complex mixture of pain, forgiveness, and quiet reconciliation. "You gave me a way to settle your debts, Father," Eleanor whispered into the soft Kansas breeze, her voice steady and clear. "You let me walk into a trap because you ran out of choices. I was angry, so angry. But standing here today, I choose to forgive you. I will leave the bitterness in this soil, and I will keep only the good memories, the way you taught me to ride, the way you cared for this land, and the love you gave me before the debt took over." Finally, Eleanor walked to the simple wooden cross that marked Sam Whitlock's final resting place. Thomas walked up beside her, gently taking her calloused hand into his own. Their fingers intertwined tightly as they looked down at the grave of the assessor who had given his life trying to protect her. Together, in the quiet prairie air, Eleanor and Thomas bowed their heads and prayed for Sam's soul to rest in eternal peace in heaven, knowing that his sacrifice had helped lead them to this moment. After visiting the cemetery, Otis took them to a small, secluded timber cabin his father had built years ago, deep in the pine woods near the river, surrounded by hills and completely invisible from the main road. For 3 weeks, the three of them lived in that quiet cabin like a real family. Clara, who had never known the warmth of a proper home, bloomed under their care. She studied Marisol's books by the hearth, helped Eleanor prepare meals, and went fishing with Thomas at the river's edge. Eleanor and Thomas shared long, quiet evenings on the cabin porch, watching the stars come out over the Kansas woods. On their first evening in the cabin, after Clara had fallen asleep in the large wooden bed, Thomas sat beside Eleanor on the porch bench. The night was cool, the wind whispering through the pines. Thomas looked at her for a long time, his green eyes filled with a deep, guarded vulnerability that he had carried since the night in Caleb's bedroom. "Eleanor," Thomas asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "that night, before the fire, when Caleb locked you in that room, did he touch you?" Eleanor turned her head, looking into his eyes with absolute clarity and warmth. She reached out, placing her hand gently against his weathered cheek. "No, Thomas," she said softly. "Clara's fire erupted at the exact second he stepped toward me. He never touched me. Not once." Thomas closed his eyes, a long, ragged breath escaping his lungs as a profound relief washed over his face. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her hair, her forehead, her lips with a reverence that spoke of a love that didn't care about legal documents or stolen vows, a love that had survived time, deception, and fire to find its true home. While Eleanor, Thomas, and Clara lived in peace inside the Kansas woods, a silent, terrifying storm was brewing back in Nebraska, one that had been 30 years in the making. To understand the sudden shattering ruin that was about to strike the Reyes family, we must look back at the dark financial architecture Doña Isabel had built over 3 decades. In 1879, a massive cattle ranch in the Nebraska territory required 3 vital lifelines to survive: water rights, clear land deeds, and bank credit. Doña Isabel Reyes had ruled the county by controlling all 3. She was the sole financial authority of the family, holding every title, every bank account, and every mortgage in her severe, unyielding grip. Her eldest son, Thomas, had been given no financial authority, receiving only a modest monthly wage while managing the physical herd. Caleb, on the other hand, received a generous allowance from his mother, but his lavish lifestyle, expensive clothes, and relentless gambling habit in Lincoln had driven him deep into secret debt. Caleb had grown bitter under his mother's strict financial control. Unable to access fast cash to pay off ruthless blackmailers into pieces in town, Caleb set his sights on the family's most valuable asset, a massive 5,000-acre parcel of prime river bottomland that contained the ranch's primary water source and the upcoming railway extension. To maintain her untouchable public image as a pious, charitable woman, Doña Isabel had years ago donated a small section of this land to the town for the construction of the county church and a local orphan school. These public deeds were her shield whenever local politicians or judges questioned her tax records. Her generous public donations ensured she remained untouched by the law. Desperate for cash, Caleb executed a monstrous crime. Using forged power of attorney documents, he secretly forged his mother's signature and listed his honest brother, Thomas, as the legal guarantor mortgaging the entire river bottom parcel, including the land beneath the county church, to an aggressive land speculator and Tefesi from Kansas City. He received a massive cash payout of $20,000, which he promptly squandered in out-of-state gambling dens and luxury brothels. Under Nebraska law in 1879, land fraud and signature forgery carried a mandatory sentence of 10 to 15 years in the state penitentiary. Now, 3 weeks after the barn fire, reality came crashing down upon the Reyes mansion. The grand house was still under repair, its charred beams exposed to the gray November sky. Caleb was spiraling into madness, unable to find Eleanor. He was more deeply mired in alcohol and gambling than ever before, and hiding from his creditors. On a cold Thursday morning, the heavy sound of wagon wheels echoed on the gravel drive. Sheriff Hollis arrived at the front porch, accompanied by 3 stern-faced bankers from Kansas City, the county land recorder, and a dozen armed deputies holding formal writs of foreclosure and seizure. Doña Isabel stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in her black wool shawl, her silver-white hair pinned in its usual severe bun, her voice dripping with royal disdain. "Hollis, what is the meaning of this intrusion on my private property?" The lead banker, a sharp-faced man named Vance, stepped forward, pulling a stack of heavy legal documents from his briefcase. "Mrs. Reyes, we are here to execute an immediate order of repossession and foreclosure on this 5,000-acre parcel, including the land beneath the county church and the North Water rights, due to non-payment of a $20,000 mortgage note." Isabel's face turned pale as stone. "That's impossible. I've never signed a mortgage note on Riverland. This property has been in the Reyes name for 30 years. "The note was signed 8 months ago, madam," Vance replied coldly, handing her the document. "Signed by Doña Isabel Reyes, with Thomas Reyes listed as primary guarantor, and we have handwriting experts from Lincoln confirming the signatures." Isabel looked down at the document. Her eyes scanned the elegant, sweeping forgery of her name, then shifted to Caleb, who stood near the doorway, his face drained of color, his hands shaking violently as he took a step back into the shadow of the porch. In that single, terrifying second, the truth struck Doña Isabel like a lightning bolt. It was not Thomas who had betrayed her. It was not strangers or judges. It was her golden son, the boy she had protected, favored, and indulged for 34 years. Caleb had forged her name, used his brother as a scapegoat, and sold the very ground beneath their feet to pay for his disgusting vices. "You," Isabel whispered, her voice cracking as she turned her head toward Caleb. "You did this." "Mother, wait, I can explain," Caleb stammered, stepping forward, but Sheriff Hollis had already drawn his iron handcuffs. "Caleb Reyes," Hollis said, his voice grave as he stepped up the porch steps. "You are under arrest for grand fraud, forgery of bank instruments, and unlawful land speculation." The iron cuffs clicked shut around Caleb's wrists with a cold metallic snap that echoed across the yard. The ranch hands stood frozen in utter shock, watching their arrogant master being dragged down the steps in chains before the eyes of the entire county. Doña Isabel stood on the porch steps, watching the Tefesis place foreclosure notices on the carved oak doors, watching the townspeople gather near the gate with accusatory, satisfied glares, watching her beloved son being pushed into the sheriff's wagon like a common thief. Her 30-year empire, her pride, her name, everything she had built on the backs of others was collapsing into ash around her feet. She gasped for air, her right hand reaching out to grab the carved porch rail. A sudden, violent pain shot through her left temple. Her left arm went completely limp, Her spine buckled, and with a soft, gasping cry, Doña Isabel Reyes collapsed onto the cold wooden floorboards of the veranda. "Señora!" Don Rufino roared, rushing forward alongside Marisol, catching her before her head struck the timber. Doña Isabel had suffered a massive, debilitating stroke. Back in Kansas, 2 days after the stroke, a telegraph reached Otis from Don Rufino. The old steward, who had guessed where Eleanor and Thomas would go, laid out the entire tragedy in short, stark sentences. Caleb arrested for forgery, the church land seized, Doña Isabel paralyzed on her bed, the ranch falling apart. Thomas, Eleanor, and Clara packed their bags and boarded the train back to Nebraska. They did not return in fear, but with the calm, steady purpose of people coming home to settle an ancient debt. When they arrived at the Reyes mansion, the house was vastly different from what they had known. The once grand structure that had intimidated the whole county was now quiet, empty, fragile. The charred timbers of the ruined wing were exposed to the sky, and the repairs had ground to a complete halt since Doña Isabel's stroke. The cold silence echoing through the dark entrance hall felt as though the very soul of the mansion had departed. Thomas did not walk upstairs. The upper floors were ruined and dangerous from the fire, their charred beams exposed to the sky. Instead, he walked slowly across the main floor, through the dim, cold hallway, toward the small room off the ground floor sitting parlor where Doña Isabel had been moved. He stood before her door for a quiet second, then opened it softly. Doña Isabel lay in a modest wooden bed on the ground floor, her silver hair loose against the white pillows. Her entire left side was completely paralyzed. Her left eye dropped slightly and her mouth could no longer form words. Yet her mind remained sharp, locked inside a broken body, her dark right eye wide with an agonizing mixture of shame, grief, and quiet despair. Thomas walked softly to the side of the bed and sat in the wooden chair. He looked at his mother for a long, silent moment. "Mother," Thomas said, his voice low, steady, and free of anger, carrying only the quiet, heavy truth of a son who had finally stopped carrying her lies. "You built this house on secrets, Mother. You bought land with other people's debts, you traded Eleanor's life to save Caleb's pride, and you turned your back on your own flesh and blood. And in the end, the son you sacrificed everything for was the one who pulled the pillar down upon your head." Tears welled in Isabel's dark right eye, rolling silently down her withered cheek. She could not speak. She could not argue. She could only lie there on the ground floor of her crumbling house, listening to the son she had discarded state the true accounting of her life. "I will not let this ranch fall to Tephesus," Thomas continued softly. "I will fix Caleb's mess. I will pay off the bank, save the church land, and restore the Reyes name to honor. But Caleb will never step foot on this property again." Because Doña Isabel was completely incapacitated, Thomas took full legal control of the estate as the eldest surviving son. But Thomas was an honest man. He would not let his brother rot in a state prison if it meant bringing permanent disgrace to Marisol and the ranch. Thomas went to town, meeting with Sheriff Hollis and Yargich Abbott. Respecting Thomas's unwavering integrity and his decades of honest labor, Judge Abbott agreed to drop the formal state forgery charges under one absolute condition. Caleb Reyes was to be permanently exiled from the state of Nebraska under penalty of immediate arrest and imprisonment if he ever returned. 2 days later, Sheriff Hollis and Thomas drove the buggy to the county line where the flat Nebraska dirt met the dry, desolate plains of the Western Territory. Caleb was brought out of the wagon, his clothes wrinkled, his handsome face hollowed by 3 weeks in a cold cell. Thomas stepped up to his brother. He did not hit him, he did not shout. He looked into Caleb's bloodshot blue eyes with a cold, absolute finality. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a single silver dollar, and tossed it into the dust at Caleb's boots. "That is your inheritance, Caleb," Thomas said, his voice ringing through the cold morning air like iron. "If you ever cross this state line again, if you ever show your face near Eleanor, Clara, or Marisol, I won't call Sheriff Hollis. I will shoot you where you stand. Go, and let us pretend you died a long time ago." Caleb stood alone in the cold wind, picking up the single silver dollar from the dirt. Behind him lay a paralyzed mother who had removed him from her life, a brother who despised him, an orphan girl he had abandoned, and a woman he could never possess. With only $1 in his pocket, Caleb turned his back on Nebraska and walked away into the barren wilderness, never to return. Before Caleb was exiled, Thomas and Yargich Abbott had forced him to sign formal annulment documents ending the fraudulent marriage to Eleanor once and for all. Yargich Abbott and Father Connolly reviewed Margaret Olson's written affidavit, the forged bank drafts from Wichita, and the county records, issuing a formal judicial decree declaring the marriage between Caleb and Eleanor null, void, and non-existent under the law. Eleanor was finally completely free. Under Nebraska's strict inheritance laws, Doña Isabel, using her right hand to make her mark on a new legal document before a court notary, formally disinherited Caleb. The new clause in her will read with brutal legal precision, "To my son Caleb Reyes, for the irretrievable shame and heartbreak he has brought upon this family, I leave as his sole and total inheritance the sum of $1 silver. He shall hold no claim, no title, and no right over any acre of land or head of livestock belonging to this estate now or forever." The fraudulent foreclosures Doña Isabel had enforced on neighboring ranches, including Old Man Kellerman's farm, were legally reversed. The lands returned to their rightful owners. 3 months later, when the winter snows began to melt and the golden sunflowers bloomed across the Nebraska plains, a simple, beautiful wedding was held at the small county church, the very church Thomas had saved from foreclosure. There were no grand crowds, no cold silver dishes, no forced vows. Only those who truly loved them. Marisol standing as Eleanor's maid of honor, young Clara standing proudly by Thomas's side, Don Rufino, Otis, who had traveled from Kansas, and the honest neighbors of Kellerman County. Father Connolly stood before them, his voice warm as he pronounced Thomas Reyes and Eleanor Hargrove, husband and wife before God and man. That evening, as repairs on the main house were finally completed, Thomas led Eleanor up the restored stairs to their newly arranged master bedroom, a room bathed in the soft, warm amber glow of a single kerosene lamp, its windows open to the sweet, cool spring breeze coming off the prairie. There was no fear in the room that night, no locked brass keys, no heavy shadows. Eleanor stood by the window in a simple white cotton nightgown, her light brown hair unpinned and falling softly over her shoulders. Thomas walked up slowly behind her, his heart full, taking in the quiet beauty of the woman he had loved across 10 long months of ink, distance, and suffering. He gently wrapped his strong, weathered arms around her waist, drawing her back against his chest, resting his chin softly against her temple. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting out a long, quiet breath that she had held since stepping off that train in Nebraska. For a year, she had known his soul through black ink on white paper, but now, for the first time, she felt the real, living warmth of him, the grounding scent of pine, leather, and fresh prairie wind that belonged to Thomas alone. "For 10 months I knew your voice only in my mind, Nell," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with a deep, aching tenderness. "I knew your heart through paper, but every night I prayed to God that I would one day hold you like this." Eleanor turned slowly in his arms, her hazel eyes shining with tears of pure, unburdened joy as she lifted her face to look at him. She reached up, her calloused fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the faint lines around his clear green eyes. "There were days I thought the letters were all we would ever have, Thomas," she whispered softly. "I thought the world would keep us apart forever." "The world tried, Nell," Thomas said softly, leaning down until his forehead rested against hers. "My mother tried, Caleb tried, and 4 miles felt like 100. But paper gave way to truth, and truth brought us home." He cupped her cheek in his hand, his thumb gently wiping away a single tear that slipped down her cheek. Slowly, reverently, Thomas leaned in and kissed her a long, tender, deeply romantic kiss that carried all the pain they had endured, all the letters they had written in the dark, and the quiet, glorious promise of a lifetime together. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his warm brown hair, surrendering completely to the safety of his embrace. In that quiet, amber-lit room, They held each other through the long night, talking in soft whispers, learning the touch and sound of one another, making love not with haste, but with the slow, sacred reverence of two souls who had finally found their rest after the storm. In the months and years that followed, peace returned to the Reyes ranch. Clara Voss was formally adopted by Thomas and Eleanor, taking the name Clara Hargrove Reyes. She excelled in her studies, attending the high school in town alongside Marisol, becoming a brilliant, strong-willed young woman who ran the ranch's financial ledgers with absolute precision. Doña Isabel lived out her remaining years in the quiet ground floor room of the house, cared for with gentle dignity by Carmen and Eleanor. Though she could never speak or walk again, her heart softened as she watched Eleanor and Thomas raise a family. She sat on the sunny veranda in her wheelchair, watching small children, Thomas and Eleanor's two young sons, playing on the green grass where her empire had once stood. Her punishment was not death, but living to see that the genuine love and honesty she had fought so hard against were the very things that saved her family from total destruction. And so, our 10-episode journey of the Porch Light comes to its emotional, unforgettable close. Every family carries its secrets, every frontier town buries its debts, and every long, dark night eventually gives way to the quiet, golden warmth of the morning sun. Across 10 episodes, we walked alongside Eleanor Hargrove as she stepped off that dusty train in Nebraska with nothing but a trunk of modest cotton dresses, her mother's cameo brooch, and an unwavering quiet dignity that no dynasty could break. We watched Thomas Reyes stand against 30 years of his mother's oppressive empire, enduring cell doors, iron chains, and the cold judgment of a town that had forgotten how to stand for what was right. We witnessed the fierce, breathtaking courage of young Clara Voss, an orphan girl who refused to be a forgotten shadow, who freed the horses, struck the match, and burned down a house of lies to give the woman she loved a second chance at freedom. In the end, Doña Isabel's great empire was not saved by her ledgers, her mortgages, or her cold, calculated power plays. It was saved by the very son she had pushed away, the durust, steady cowboy who chose to pay back his brother's fraudulent debts, restore honor to the family name, and welcome an orphan girl into his heart as his own daughter. Caleb Reyes walked out into the desolate Western Territory with only a single silver dollar in his pocket, a fitting end for a man who had measured the value of human souls in trades, power, and legal documents. And Doña Isabel Reyes, sitting quietly in her wheelchair on the sunny porch, learned in her silent years that the porch light she had tried so hard to extinguish was the very light that guided her family back from the brink of total darkness. The American frontier was not built merely by guns, gold, or vast herds of cattle. It was built by ordinary people facing extraordinary trials, by women who kept their dignity when all hope seemed lost, by men who stood steady when the gale blew hardest, and by the quiet, daily acts of devotion that build a home out of an unforgiving wilderness. As the spring breeze moves across the wide Nebraska plains, the sweet scent of blooming sunflowers and damp earth fills the evening air around the Reyes ranch. The long, white-painted fence rails that border the south pasture stand straight and clean against the golden horizon, freshly mended by Thomas's own hands. In the quiet dusk, the cattle graze peacefully near the clear waters of the river, crossing the very water rights that had once been mortgaged in secret, now fully restored and secured for generations to come. Inside the warm, timber-framed house, the long walnut dining table no longer carries the cold, oppressive silence of Doña Isabel's reign. Instead, it is filled with the lively, comforting sounds of a true family. Marisol sits near the tall window, helping young Clara review her natural history and mathematics examinations for the upcoming school term in town. Don Rufino moves quietly between the sideboard and the kitchen door, his tired eyes carrying a peaceful, gentle warmth as he sets down fresh bread baked by Carmen. Downstairs in her quiet room, Doña Isabel rests beneath her wool blanket, listening to the soft laughter of her grandchildren echoing from the yard below. A quiet, constant reminder that love, honesty, and forgiveness have finally replaced the cold machinery of fear and control. Out on the broad front porch, where the hanging kerosene lantern casts a steady, warm amber circle across the smooth floorboards, Thomas and Eleanor sit side by side on the wooden bench. Thomas holds his wife's hand in his own calloused palm, his green eyes reflecting the vast starlit Nebraska sky that stretches endlessly in every direction. They do not need to speak of the hard trail behind them, of the cell doors, the forged notes, or the red sky that burned above the barn. The distance between Kansas and Nebraska, between 4 miles and forever, has finally been closed. They are home, surrounded by the people they fought for, living a life built on truth, dignity, and an unbreakable devotion. Thank you for being with us on the trail. Until we meet again on the next journey, keep the light on the porch.